back. Welcome. I want to talk a little bit about the theme for our time together today, which is about networks and being intentional about weaving more effective networks for transformation. So, Michael, and those of you who are in the room, when Michael sort of opened talk, might remember this slide. So this is about the Social Innovation Lab. It's really, our intention is about creating an opportunity for people to create connections and projects, advance projects, and learn new thinking and tools. So, to advance the work that they want to do. So here's what we're going to be exploring today. The new thinking is, for some of you, it's not new. Many of you have been working very intentionally with networks for a long, long time. But by thinking together, we will hopefully generate some new insight. So the new thinking and the learning will be about the tools. We'll be specifically working with network maps. Advancing projects, we have about 35 projects in the room that have prepared network maps as a way of having a conversation about how to explore the power of those networks to move their work forward. And then we're going to have a series of 3 conversations in terms of connections through the room. And with people who are very, very close to the core of those projects, and then other people who are not so close to the work on those projects, who can give them perhaps some fresh perspectives. Because part of this work is based on the understanding that innovation and new thinking arises at the space between different backgrounds and different cultures and different sectors, different fields, different age, different race. So part of what we're looking at is the new thinking that can arise in the spaces between us. So we're mixing it up. You'll be at several different tables today. Let's see. And here's what we're hoping you'll leave with. So in terms of the sort of tools, maybe a better appreciation and understanding of how a network approach to social innovation can help you move work forward. To lead in terms of your projects, just energized to apply that appreciation and that understanding to your own work. And in terms of connections, it'd be great if you leave with at least one new or renewed relationship that inspires you. I want to talk a little bit about why we landed, those of us organizing the lab landed on the theme of network weaving. So last time, which was the first time we launched the lab in May, we divided the whole group, asked people to self-organize into spots in the room according to their priority of why you're here. You've already talked a little bit about what you're hoping for. What we discovered in May was that we asked all the people who were interested in most in advancing projects to stand over there, people who are most interested in learning over here, and then people most interested in forging relationships, that part of the room. And to many of our surprise, because these were the voices that had not been most vocal in preparing for the lab, by far most of the people went to the corner of the room that was about relationships and connections, which is not what we expected. So those of us organizing started thinking, well, how do we use all this energy around forging relationships to move good work forward? And that's how we landed on the theme of network weaving. And we reached out to June Holly, who is somebody who is not directly connected with our work, but somebody who's done a lot of thinking and helped a lot of people think about how do you weave more effective networks to move your work forward. So we reached out to her to help design, and that's how we landed on this theme. So what I'd like to do is to ask, I keep talking about the we, and I'd like to bring a little bit part of the we up here. So first of all, you have an idea of who I'm talking about when I keep saying we, but also as a way of illustrating and demonstrating some different aspects of what creates a network. So I'd like the core team, so those of us on the core, if you're going to come up here. Okay. So this core, the core of a project is like the bunch of people who show up and do most of the work. they get to know each other because they show up all the time. So this has been the core for getting ready for this lab. What I'm going to ask us to do is just put one hand on the shoulder of somebody who you've worked with before in this course.
Before the Social Innovation Lab?
Yeah, before the Social Innovation Lab. Okay. What do you notice? Okay, so Vikas is out there, and I'm just wondering, is there anyone in the room who is connected, who's connected or knows Vikas? Okay. Anybody? All right, I'm going to ask you to jump up here, some of you, and put a hand on Vikas's shoulder. So you'll just come up and just put a, if you know Vikas, just come up and just put a hand on his shoulder. Okay. So, thank you. So some of the aspects of this, we know something about this network now that we didn't know before, and it was something we didn't know before we actually did it, so realizing some of this. So one of the things you might notice is how many arms are on Sam. Sam is a connector. Sam is a hub. Like, he's a hub because he's got lots and lots of connections to people who aren't necessarily connected to someone else. So each one of us is a point in this network. We're all a part of this network. The term for that is we're like a node. So you'll see this when we move, you'll see nodes as little dots on network maps when we talk about projects later. So each one of us a node, and our arms represent the ways we are linked and we are interconnected. So we wanted to work on network weaving, and we knew of Vikas's work because he developed software to track the informal networks in organizations. So we asked Vikas if he would become part of the core of this. And notice that when we linked up with Vikas, we also linked up with a whole lot of people we were not linked up with before, who are now, they're not necessarily part of our core, but they could be. They're part of the edge of our community. They're like on our periphery. So a lot of what this work is about is being really intentional about who's in the core, who's on the edge, who needs to be in the core, who isn't. The other thought, last thing I just wanted to say about this was that those folks over there, when they were not linked up with us, those are a cluster. It's like a clique, sort of an informal clique that's not connected up. So a lot of what this morning is about is just really thinking about these projects, from who's linked up, who needs to be linked up, who isn't. So I think that's okay, great, thank you. We did that. The last thing I just wanted to say, before I pass this on to other colleagues who are going to introduce a little bit more about networks, was the difference between networking and network weaving. And when I think about networking, I think about an individual who's trying to purposefully increase their connections, maybe to get a job or get a better apartment, but it's about the individual, like that little starburst thing that we have with Vikas. One individual making up lots of connections to that person. Network weaving is about something else. It's about seeing the larger system, seeing how we are part of a larger system. Each node is part of the network, and as someone said to me this morning, and each node is the network. Each node is part of the network, and each node is the network. So what that means is that network weaving is a lot about recognizing that the power of our work can be vastly enhanced by being intentional and recognizing our interconnectedness and being intentional about that. And that we can better shift societal systems if we intentionally strengthen and increase our connectedness. So those are sort of some of the underlying assumptions that have informed the design for how we are today. My invitation is please make this useful to yourselves. That's the hope. And if that means that you're really purposeful about how you use a break, or how you're connecting with people here. Just the invitation again, please make this useful for yourselves. So with that, I want to pass this over to Dylan, and then Sam will be part of saying a little bit more about networks. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Dylan. I just want to talk a little bit more about what networks are. When we talk about network weaving, we're talking about trying to create connections within projects and also between projects. But it's useful just to know a little bit about networks in general, about how networks work. And so we're talking about people today. But networks can be any collection of things that are linked up. So you see the image on the slide. It looks kind of like a net, and it's all linked up so that some work can happen because of the links. And so as Wendy was talking, the network language is the dots are nodes, and the lines in between that are the relationships are the links. And so that could be any collection of things. That way. Wendy talked about a hub. She used Sam as an example of a hub and a network. This is a Delta airline map. And you can see that some of the cities have a lot of flights going to it. And some of the cities, like Minot, North Dakota, only has one. And so the cities with a lot, like we're a hub. We're a hub because we've got Delta Airlines here. And that's actually really useful to think about for your networks, because having someone like Sam who knows a bunch of people helps keep the network strong so you can make sure everyone gets connected in. One thing to think about in terms of your networks are how are they actually organized? This is an image up here of a couple of different kinds of network architecture. So the one on the left there, the sort of starburst looking one, that's kind of just one hub. There's one hub in the middle and lots of spokes coming out. And what's really useful about that is it's really easy to communicate. Who's ever in the middle just sends it all out, one link to everybody, and that's it. And that's the way a lot of projects go, where there's just one person doing all the work, telling everyone what to do. But there's some limitations to that as well, which is it's that one person and their opinion and whatever else. And if they're out of the picture, there's no links between any of the other nodes on there. So that's a bit of a weak spot. The next one is called decentralized. And you can see there some of the clusters that Wendy was referring to. That there's sort of teams that can work alone possibly, but are still connected in all together. And a lot of organizations these days are trying to go for that, something like that, where there's teams that could be trusted to work on their own, make decisions, etc., but that are still connected in some way. The last one is called a dispersed or distributed network. And that's totally flat. Everything's equal, everything's connected. And so the nice thing about that is that everything's equal, everything's connected, everyone can help make decisions and so on. On the other hand, it's harder to organize. It's not like the first one where just one person is like, let's all do that. And so it's just something to consider as you're considering your networks is how are you organized? Do you need to move towards something more dispersed? Or do you need something more decentralized and so on? And Sam's going to tell a little story about a group that worked with exactly these kinds of issues.
Thanks, Dylan. Good morning, everyone. So, real quick story. Normally, as projects evolve, they go from highly centralized to more decentralized. I'm going to tell a quick story about one project I've been involved in that actually started over here and needed to come over here in order to get back to here. So I'm a founder of AfroEco, which is a network, movement building organization committed to changing the relationship between blacks and the land globally. We've got artists, academics, farmers, economists, environmental scientists all working with us. And we have all of these people who are doing these amazing things in the world. We come together regularly for meetings, but there was no there in terms of taking action on the ground. This summer, as we were beginning to organize to start the urban agriculture movement locally, we had to find somebody who was a hub, and that was Project Sweetie Pie, which actually was a point of connection where everybody was coming, saying, this is the group that is making things happen. So it was the place to come to. As a result of focusing on 10 gardens this year, we now have a big enough network with enough different capacities. We can move back to this form, and by next summer, we can have a really dispersed network of about 200 black growers growing food, all in union for greater productivity, greater food security, greater health in the African American community. But it had to start here, come here, and then move back here. So it's just an interesting story about evolution.
This is a picture of San Francisco at night. And, well, you can't see because there's too much light. It's totally black in that image. And that's a picture of San Francisco on August 10th, 1996. I lived in San Francisco for most of the 90s. And on that night, there was a blackout. And it was fantastic because usually the city is filled with light all the time. You don't even know what a city looks like without light. And it was very hot, which is unusual for San Francisco, so everyone was out walking through the dark city. And there was one falafel place that was having a grand opening that had rented a generator. And they had lights, and they had a belly dancer, and the guy would come from behind the counter every once in a while and dance with the spatula. It was really fantastic night. But it was a really unprecedented heat wave. And up in Oregon, all the power going through the lines to run the air conditioners and so on made the lines sag, and they hit some filbert trees and failed. And the power didn't have anywhere to go. Rushed to the next bit, those lines failed. There was cascading failures throughout the entire network from Canada to Mexico along the whole West Coast. So without the link there, in other words, the network couldn't work. And so this is something to think about in your projects. What needs to be linked up to allow the work to happen, to allow the transmission to happen, because that's what the network is for, is to transmit information, to have the relationships and so on. This is an image of a food web in Antarctica. And all the arrows that point are who eats who. This is all about who's eating who in this situation. And a lot of different creatures are eating each other, but basically everybody is eating the krill, or somebody who eats the krill. The krill's at the bottom there. The krill's a tiny, almost microscopic creature. And the krill live under the ice, and they're really threatened right now because of global warming, because all the ice is melting. And so if that link goes, possibly there could be cascading failures, just like there was in the power outage on the West Coast. One of the things that's been useful about this image to think about for your projects is the need for diversity. There has to be a lot of different kinds of links, a lot of different kinds of creatures in the network to make it work. If it's all the same thing, if it was just all whales, it's no good. You gotta have the krill in there, so in this case, somebody has something to eat. I'm using different examples of electrical grids and food webs and so on, just to show you that the network is kind of a universal thing in terms of linking things up. But of course, we're thinking about projects and people, especially. It's all about relationships with people. So this image is an image of a smart network. And this image is from June Holly, who Wendy was referring to before. And this is what June Holly says is kind of an ideal for a project, an ideal network for a project. And what's healthy about it is that there's a really strong core, lots of people in there working in the core, working on the project, hopefully a lot of diverse groups in there working. And then there's also a strong periphery. Because if you have all the same people who are working on it every day, people get kind of the same ideas, same mindset, you already know what your resources are. But to have people on the outside who are interested but maybe not working on it every day, they're the ones who bring in more resources, including new ideas, who bring new things into the mix. They might not want to work on it, but they might be able to help out in some way. So to have both of those bits is incredibly helpful, and it's something to be intentional about in your projects. Do you have a strong core and a strong periphery? And the pattern of that allows for a lot of collaboration and therefore innovation. This image is gone, but so how do you have a strong core periphery? You can start by asking some questions, which is one is who is in your core? Like actually map that out, and that's partly what we had the project hosts start to do with the network map. Is just start to see who's there, and also ask who's not in your core but should be, who's missing from the project or from the conversation. And one way to think about that is who are your stakeholders? Who actually have a stake in what the project is trying to do? So a couple of years ago when there was the tsunami in Indonesia, and it was a horrible thing, 200,000 people died, the international aid community rushed to help, and they just poured food into the area. And you know, it seemed like an obvious thing to do, but one of the unintended consequences of that was that the people who sell food in that area got wiped out because there was all this free food, and so they couldn't actually do what they do for a living. So it might have been interesting for the people who were planning aid to actually include those people, the Indonesian villagers who were food sellers, into the planning process, to bring those people in, even if in an advisory role in some way. So it's just a good thing to ask, who's going to be affected by this project? And so yeah, so are they represented in your core? Are your stakeholders represented in some way? And another thing to ask is just who's interested in your project? Maybe not everyone's going to be in the core, but if you invite people to participate and you ask how have you actually made your project available to people, people will find their way, whether they want to be in the core or in the periphery or whatever. The other thing to ask is, what are similar projects going on to yours? So what are 10 similar projects to yours around the country? Because you want lots of diversity, people on the outside and everything, but you also definitely want to connect to projects who are doing something similar to yours, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, so you can get help from each other. And so how have you connected with people who are doing similar projects to you? So network weaving is about intentionally strengthening and increasing the connections, both within your project, but also to other projects, because we're trying to create a whole inclusive community and society altogether. And then sometimes when you make the connections with people who are truly outside your network, who you don't even think are relevant or interested in what you're doing, that's when the magic happens, because that's when you're getting a truly new idea. So the more perspectives there are, the better the solutions. If you think of, if you're looking for a job, your 4 best friends already kind of know you and you kind of know what they have to offer, but if you have people on your periphery, that's sometimes where the new ideas come in. And similarly, that's how ecosystems work. When lots of plants and animals together, you want lots of different, you want the diversity, you want lots of different kind of things there. So yeah, we want connections within networks, but we also want connections between networks, because we are trying to create that ecosystem. We're trying to actually create a strong fabric, strong social fabric. There are many networks already existing in society. We can recognize those. And one thing just to acknowledge is that some of them are about trying to be exclusive and trying to get resources for just their group and to keep everybody else out. And so that's not network weaving. That's some fear-based, us against them kind of mentality. And so network weaving is about going beyond that and seeing that it's not just about a group, it's about society altogether, and to keep linking up not just within your project, but to other projects. It's also useful to notice that networks, this kind of network, they're self-organizing. You can't control them, you can't command people to be part of your group and to do the work. So it's how inviting is it? How much can you invite the people in to be a part of your group or to make connections with other people? And if you could recognize that that's the case, that it's self-organizing, then you need a way to work that's not about creating a big plan and imposing it. You want to stay relational because you're about trying to make the links. And so one way to do that is just to be in a general attitude and practice of experimentation. Just try something, see if it works, get some feedback, try it again. And that's a way to stay relational. Otto Scharmer calls this exploring the future by doing. You know, you create little prototypes, get feedback from it, and keep moving from there, and draw people in as that goes on. So this image up here is from June Holly as well, because we're thinking about relationships, thinking about how to invite people in. The bit on the left there is a network. Let's say it's an organization, and all those people are connected because they all work together. The bit on the right is who trusts who. So you can see the top three all trust each other, and the bottom two trust each other, but the two groups don't trust each other. And so just like the electrical grid that failed, if you don't have the links there, there can't be the transmission. The work actually can't happen in the network. And so it's really important to take care of the relationships. That's really basic to this whole network weaving idea, is that it's about relationships. It's about collaboration. So can you bring the Indonesian villagers and the aid workers into the room at the same time? You know, who are you going to invite to actually be part of your new project? Are you being transparent about it, inviting collaboration? All those kind of things that invite and engender trust. So one simple way just to start building networks for yourself is to close triangles. So if you know someone, and you also know another person, and you think it might be useful for them to know each other, you can just introduce them and help them know each other, especially if you think they're like-minded, or if you think they could have something to offer each other. That's just one simple way to start building a network. And I'd actually like to invite you all to do that today, maybe during the break, is find two people in the room, if you know two people in the room, and see if you can introduce them so we can actually start that happening right now. So the way we often think about things is, this is the one thing I'm focusing on. And what we're trying to do here, thinking about networks, is to think about how can I be open to relationship so that if I'm fitting in with other people, that I'm able to do that I'm able to have those relationships, that I'm always thinking like an ecosystem, basically. I'm always trying to be aware, because there are all those people already. So am I going to be connected to them in a good way? Am I going to be related to them in a good way? So we're thinking that creativity arises at the intersection of difference. That's why we want so many different kinds of people and ideas in networks, and both at the core and the periphery. And we also think that if we take care of relationships, that the quality of those relationships dictate how the networks will operate, if there's trust, all that sort of thing. And also that if we pay attention not just to the part, but how the part fits into the whole, that's how we can have the most effective and benign impact.